Hello guys, let's start the next chapter of Peter and Wendy. Chapter 13. Do you believe in fairies? The more quickly this horror is disposed of, the more quickly this horror is disposed of, the better. The first to emerge from his tree was Curly. He rose out of the he, he rose out of into the arms of Checo, who flung him to Smee, who flung him to Starkey, who flung him to Bill Jukes, who flung him to Noodler, and so he was tossed from one to another till he fell at the feet of the Black Pirate. And so he was tossed from one to another, and so he was tossed from one to another till he fell at the feet of the Black Pirate. All the boys were plucked from their trees in this ruthless manner. All of the boys was all of the boys were plucked from their trees in this ruthless manner, and several of them were in the air at the time, like bales of goods flung from hand to hand. A different treatment, a different treatment was accorded to Wendy, who came last. With ironical politeness, Hook raised his hat to her, and, offering her as his arm, escorted her to a spot where the others were being gagged. He did it with such an air, he was so frightfully distingué, that she was too fascinated to cry out. She was only a little girl. Perhaps it is telltale to divulge that for a moment Hook entranced her, and we tell on her and we tell on her only because her sleep led to strange results. Had she heftily unhanded him, and we should have loved to write it to her, and we should have loved to write it of her, should have been hurled through the air like the others, and then Hook would probably not have been present at the tying of their children. And had he not been at the time, and, and had he not been at the time, he would not have discovered Slightly's secret, and without the secret he could not presently have made his foul attempt on Peter's life. They were tired to they were they were tied to prevent their flying away, doubled up with their knees close to their ears, and for the trusting of them and for the trusting of them, the Black Pirate had cut a rope into 9 equal pieces. All went well until Slightly's turn came, when he was found to be like those irritating parcels that use up all the string in going round and leave no tags with which to tie a knot. The pirates kicked him in the rage, just as you kick the parcel, though in fairness you should kick the string. And strange to say, it was Hook who told them to belay their violence. His lip was curled with malicious triumph, while his dogs were merely sweating because every time they tried to pack the unhappy lad tight in one part, he burst out in another. Hook's mastermind had gone far beneath Slightly's surface, probing not for effects but for causes, and his exultation showed that he had found them. Slightly, white to the gills, knew that Hook had surprised his secret, which was this: that no boy so blown out could use a tree wherein an average man needs stick. Poor Slightly, most wretched of all the children now, for he was in panic about Peter, bitterly regretted what he had done. Madly addicted to the drinking of water when he was hot, he had swelled in consequence to his present girth, and instead of reducing himself to fit his tree he had, unknown to the others, whittled his tree to make it fit in. Sufficient of this Sufficient of this, Hook guessed to persuade him that Peter at last lay at his mercy, but no word of the dark design that now formed in the subterranean caverns of his mind crossed his lips. He merely signed that the captives were to be conveyed to the ship, and that he would be alone. How to convey them? Hunched up in their ropes, they might indeed be rolled down. They might indeed be rolled downhill like barrels, but most of the way lay through a morass. Again Hook's genius surmounted difficulties. He indicated that the little house must be used as a conveyance. Conveyance. The children were flung into it. Four stout pirates raised it on their shoulders. The others fell in behind, and singing the hateful pirate chorus, the strange procession set off through the wood. I don't know whether any of the children were crying. If so, they sang drowned the sound. But as the little house disappeared in the forest, a very tiny jet of smoke issued from its chimney as if defying Hook. Hook saw it, and it did Peter Hook saw it, and it did Peter a better service. It dried up any trickle of pity for him that may have remained in Pirate's infuriated breast. The first thing he did on finding himself alone in the fast-falling night was to tiptoe to his lightless tree, and make sure that it provided him with a passage. Then for long he remained brooding. His hat of ill omen on the shard, so his hat of the ill omen on the shard, on the sward, on that any gentle breeze might play which had refreshingly through his hair. Dark, dark as were his thoughts, his blue eyes were as soft as periwinkle. Intently he listened for any sound from the nether world, but all was as silent below as above. The house under the ground seemed to be but one more empty tenement in the void. Was that boy asleep, or did he stand waiting at the foot of Slight's tree, with his dagger in his hand? With his dagger in his hand. There was no way of knowing, save by going down. Hook let his cloaks slip softly to the ground, and then biting his lips, till a lewd blood stood on them. He stepped into the tree. He was a brave man, but for a moment he had to stop there and wipe his brow, which was reaping like a candle. Then, silently, he let himself go into the unknown. He arrived unmolested at the foot of the shaft, and stood still again, biting at his wrath, which had almost left him. As his eyes became accustomed to the dim light, various objects in the home under the trees took shape, but the only one on which his greedy gaze rested, long sought for and found at last, was a great bed. On the bed lay Peter fast asleep. Unaware of the tragedy being enacted above, Peter had continued, for a little time after the children left, to play gaily on his pipes, no doubt rather a forlorn attempt to prove to himself that he did not care. Then he decided not to take his medicine, so as to grieve Wendy. Then he lay down on the bed outside the coverlet, to vex her still more, for she had always took them inside it. For she had always took them inside it, because you never know what you may not grow chilly at the turn of the night. Then he nearly cried, but it struck him how indignant should be if she left instead. So he left, and fell asleep in the middle of it. Sometimes, though not often, he had dreams, and they were more painful than the dreams of the other boys. For hours he could not be separated from these dreams, though he wailed piteously in them. They had to do, I think, with the rid of his existence. At such times he had been Wendy's custom to take him out of bed and sit with him on her lap, soothing him in dear ways of her own invention. And when he grew calmer to put him back to bed before he quite woke up, so that he should not know of the indignity to which she had subjected him. But on this occasion he had fallen at once into the dreamless sleep. One arm dropped over the edge of the bed, one leg was arched, and the unfinished part of his left was strained on his mouth, which was open, showing the little pearls. Thus defenseless Hook found him. He stood silent at the foot of the tree, looking across the chamber at his enemy. Did no feeling of compassion disturb his sombre breast? The man was not wholly evil. He loves flowers, I have been told, and sweet music. He was himself no mean performer of the harpsichord. And, let it be frankly admitted, the idyllic nature of the scene stirred him profoundly. Mastered by this better self, he would have returned reluctantly up the tree, but for one thing. What stayed him was Peter's impersonal appearance as he slept. The open mouth, the drooping arm, the arched knee, they were such a personification they were such a personification of a cockiness as, taken together, will never again, one may hope, be presented to eyes so sensitive to their offensiveness. They steel Hook's heart. If his rage had broken him into 100 pieces, every one of them would have disregarded of the incident, and leapt at the sleeper. Though a light from the one lamp shone dimly on the bed, Hook stood in darkness himself, and at the first stealthy step forward he discovered an obstacle, the door of Slatter's tree. He did not entirely fill the aperture, and he had been looking over it. Feeling for the catch, he found his fury that he was long down, beyond his reach. To his disordered brain, it seems then that the irritating quality in Pierre's face and figure visibly increased, and he rattled the door and flung himself against it. Was his enemy to escape him? Was his enemy to escape him? Was his enemy escaped to him after all? But what was that? The red in his eye had caught sight of Peter's medicine, standing on a ledge within easy reach. He fed on what it was straight away, and immediately knew that the sleeper was in his power. Lest he should be taken alive, Hook always carried about the person. Lest he should be taken alive, Hook always carried about his person a dreadful drug, blended by himself of all the death-dealing rings that had come into his possession. These had been these had these he had boiled down into a yellow liquid quite unknown to science, which was probably the most virulent poison in existence. Lest he should be five drops of his 5 drops of this, now added to Peter's cup. 5 drops of this he now added to Peter's cup. His hand shook, but it was in exultation rather than in shame. As he did it, he avoided glancing at the sleeper, but not lest pity should unnerve him, merely to avoid spilling. Then one long gloating look he cast upon his victim, and turning, wormed his way into with difficulty up the tree. As he emerged at the top, he looked the very spirits of evil breaking from its hole. Donning his hat at its most rakish angle, he wound his cloak around him, holding one end in front of holding one end in front holding one end in front as if to conceal his person from the night, of which he was the blackest part, and muttering strangely to himself, he stole away through the trees. Peter slept on. The light guttered and went out. Leaving the tenement in darkness, but still he slept. It must have been not less than 10 o'clock by the crocodile, when he suddenly sat up in his bed, weakened by he knew not what. He was a soft, cautious tapping on the door of his tree. Soft and cautious, but in that stillness it was sinister. Soft and cautious, but in that stillness it was sinister. Soft and cautious, but in the stillness it was sinister. Peter felt for his dagger till his hand gripped it. Peter felt for his dagger till his hand gripped it. Then he spoke. Who is that? For long there was no answer. Then again the knock. Who are you? No answer. He was thrilled, and he loved being thrilled. In two strides he reached the door. Unlike Slightly's door, it filled the aperture, so that he could not see beyond it, nor could the one knocking see him. I won't open unless you speak, Peter cried. Then at, la- then at last the visitor spoke, on a lovely bell-like voice. Let me in, Peter. It was Tink, and quickly he unbarred her. He unbarred to her. She flew in excitedly, her face flushed and her dress stained with mud. What is it? Oh, we could never guess, she cried, and offering him three guesses. Out of it, he shouted. He shouted, and when in one ungrammatical sentence, as long as the ribbons the conjurers pull from their mouths, she told of the capture of Wendy's and the boys. Peter's heart bobbed up and down. Peter's heart bobbed up and down. Peter's heart bobbed up and down as she listened. As he listened, Peter's heart bobbed up and down as he listened. Windbound, and on the pirate ship, she who loved everything to be just so. I'll rescue her! I'll rescue her! He cried, lapping at his weapons. As he leapt, he thought of something he could do to please her. He could take his medicine. His hand closed on the fatal draught. No! Shrieked Tinker Bell, who had heard Hook mutter. No! Shrieked Tinker Bell, who had heard Hook, who had heard Hook, who had heard Hook mutter, who had heard who had heard Hook mutter about his deed as he sped through the forest. No! Shrieked Tinker Bell, who had heard Hook mutter about his deed as he sped through the forest. Why not? It's poisoned. Poisoned? Who could have poisoned it? Hook! Don't be silly. How could Hook have gotten down here? Alas, Tinker Bell could not explain this, for even she did not know the dark secrets of Slightly's tree. Nevertheless, Hook's words had left no room for doubt. The cup was poisoned. Besides, said Peter, quite believing himself, I never fall asleep. He raised the cup. No time for words now. Time for deeds. And with one of her lightning movements, Tink got between his lips and the draught, and drained into the dregs. Why, Tink? How dare you drink my medicine? But she did not answer. Already she was reeling in the air. What is the matter with you? Cried Peter, suddenly afraid. It was poison, Peter, she told him softly, and now I am going to be dead. Oh, Tink, did you drink it to save me? Yes. What do I think? Her wings would clearly carry her now. But in reply, she alighted on his shoulder and gave his nose a loving bite. She whispered in his ear, You silly ass, and then, tottering to her chamber, lay down on the bed. His head almost filled the fourth wall of her little room as he knelt near her in distress. His head almost filled the fourth wall of her little room as he knelt near her in distress. Every every moment her light was growing fainter, and he knew that if he went out she would be no more. She liked his tears so much that she put out her beautiful finger and let it run over it. Her voice was so low that at first he could not make out what she said. Then he made it out. She was saying that she thought she could get well again if the children believed in fairies. Peter flung out his arms. There were no children there, and it was night time, but he addressed all who might be dreaming of the Neverland, and who were therefore nearer him than you think. Boys and girls in their 90s. and naked papooses in the baskets hung from the trees. "Do you believe?" he cried. Tink sat in bed, almost briskly to listen to her fate. She fancied she heard answers in the affirmative, and then again she wasn't sure. "What do you think?" she asked Peter. "If you believe," he shouted to them, "clap your hands. Don't let Tink die." Many clapped. Some didn't. A few beasts hissed. The clapping stopped suddenly, as if countless mothers had rushed to their nurseries to see what on earth was happening. But already Tink was saved. First her voice grew strong, then she popped out of bed. Then she was flashing through the room, more merry and impudent than ever. She never thought of thanking those who believed, but she would have liked to get but she would have liked to get at the ones who have hissed. And now to rescue Wendy. The moon, the moon was riding in a cloudy heaven when Peter rose from his tree, begirt with, begirt with weapons and wearing little else, to set up upon his perilous quest. It was not, it was not such a night. It was not such a night as he would have chosen. He had hoped to fly, keeping not far from the ground, so that nothing unwanted should escape his eyes. But in the fitful life to have flown loud, but in the but in the fitful light, but in the fitful light to have flown low, but in the fitful light to have flown low would have meant trailing his shadow through the trees, thus disturbing birds and acquainting a watchful foe that he was a steer. He regretted now that he had given the birds of the island such strange names that they are very wild and difficult to approach. There was no other course but to press forward in redskin fashion, as which happily he was an adept. But in what direction? For he could not be sure that the children had been taken to the ship. A light fall of snow had obliterated all footmarks, and a deathly silence pervaded the island, as if for a space nature stood still in horror of the recent carnage. He had taught the children something of the forest. He had taught the children something of the forest lore that he had himself learned from the tiger lily and tickle bell, and knew that in their desire hour they were not likely to forget it. Slightly, if he had an opportunity, would blaze the trees for instance. Curly would drop seeds, and Wendy would leave her handkerchief at some important place. The morning was needed to search for such guidance, and he could not wait. The upper world had called him, would, would, but would give no help. The crocodile passed him, but not another. The crocodile had passed. The crocodile passed him, but not another living thing. But not another, not another living thing, not a sound, not a movement. And yet he knew well that sun and death might be at next tree, or stalking him from behind. He swore this terrible oath: Hook or me this time. Hook or me this time. Now he crawled forward like a snake, and again erect, he darted across a space on which the moonlight played, one finger on his lip and his dagger one finger on his lip and his dagger at the ready. He was frightfully happy. Now he crawled forward like a snake, and again erect, he darted across a space on which the moonlight played, one finger on his lip one finger on his lip one finger one finger one finger on his lip one finger on his lip and his dagger at the ready. He was frightfully happy. Okay, guys, that's the end of chapter 13. Until next time.